Welcome back to the Sound of Loneliness podcast. We hope you are inspired by the voices of grit and grace we share in these episodes. Today's episode is called Hungry Hearts. A reminder to like, follow, and subscribe to the Sound of Loneliness podcast wherever you listen, and to our YouTube channel. This will continue to grow our capacity to offer you more of what you would like to listen to. So, happy Valentine's Day, Kiara.
Yes, happy Valentine's Day.
Do you like hearing that?
I don't know. I'm not a romantic, so there's a little bit of a cringiness for me that comes with that. How about you?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I like hearing it. But I think I'm not supposed to like hearing it.
I think that's very relatable.
Yeah, like lots of people talk about Valentine's Day as being like a Hallmark holiday and roll their eyes and whatever. And I am a romantic, so I'm like any excuse to like celebrate love and do really sweet gestures. And I'm like, cool, now we get to do it on purpose. But then I'm like, oh, but that's stupid, isn't it? So yes, I have a little internal war within me when I hear the term Valentine's Day.
You're conflicted.
I'm conflicted. I'm internally conflicted and aware of my internal conflict, at least to a degree.
Right.
So we were going to talk today about Valentine's Day. We were thinking about, we've got this podcast that's about loneliness. And when we think about Valentine's Day and we think about loneliness in relation to it, I was saying, the stereotypical thing is, people who don't have a romantic relationship on Valentine's Day or a partner and want to, maybe they're the ones that feel lonely. And that feels like the typical thing that people think of when they think of loneliness and Valentine's Day. Mm-hmm. And so we decided not to talk about it from that angle.
No, we decided to put a little bit of a spin on it and kind of talk about the idea of feeling lonely in relationships, which I think is less touched on.
Yeah, it's almost a lack of awareness around it. It's maybe something that people would talk about less. Almost like, what do you have to be upset about? You're in a relationship, right? Or how could you possibly be lonely? You have someone.
Yes.
Right.
I think there can also be a bit of embarrassment, maybe shame, worry about judgment that can come with that.
And I think even people don't always know what a relationship actually is like behind the scenes, right? So we might think that someone is very cared for in a relationship and that a couple's really happy. And we don't really know that, to be fair, unless we go home with them every night. We don't know how they talk to each other, how they treat each other behind closed doors. We can sometimes get a window into that in public, I think. But you don't know how the person actually feels in that relationship. I've been in relationships before where I have really protected the image of the relationship so much so that nobody knew that I was just desolate inside. I was so lonely in that relationship. Nobody knew. I would have never talked about it.
Right. And is it not the pretending that exacerbates the loneliness? Because you're also playing a role to a degree. I can imagine that part of it would be extra challenging.
Yeah. Then you really have no one to talk to about it, right? Because you're also sort of denying that the loneliness exists. And yeah, the shame around, I shouldn't feel this way, or I should be grateful. All the shoulds can start to come in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or maybe the shame around, well, why am I with someone that's making me feel this way? Right? Why did I choose this relationship? Why am I in a relationship like this again where I feel lonely? Those kinds of things can go through people's minds. Right? And I think we almost fear what the reaction will be from others if we share the truth about how we're feeling in our relationships. Or if we're hearing everybody talk about how wonderful and hunky-dory theirs is, then we're like, well, I'm not gonna bring the truth in.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
But we're going to talk about it today.
We are. We're going to expose this.
Yes.
And I think this might be, again, an important topic to create a space to normalize that. I think this is something a lot of us have experienced.
Yes.
And hopefully by bringing light to it, again, it can, when you put the spotlight on shame, it takes away its power. So hopefully by doing this, we can kind of remove that a little bit.
Yeah. And make people feel like they're not the only ones. Because I got to say, like, it's a pretty common theme at least in my office with clients, to hear about the pain of loneliness in their relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
We have a really interesting vantage point as couples therapists, because we can even see how the couple walks into the room and even a bit of the image that's maybe been created. And then they sit down on the couch and reveal themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So we have this really interesting insight that a lot of people don't have the opportunity to see.
Yep. Agreed. If someone is feeling lonely, I think, one of the first things that comes to my mind is, what is the nature of their connection to their partner? What's the depth like? How do they connect? Is that what comes to your mind? Do you think about connection when you think about someone speaking about their relationship and saying that they're feeling really lonely within it?
Yeah, definitely. I think about connection. I think about what connection means to each person. So connection kind of being the starting place to explore, and then really understanding for each individual what it actually means to them to feel connected. Because I think each of us experience connection differently, and what it means to feel connected, I think, is very personal. Is that what you notice as well?
Yeah, and I remember you saying you and your husband were talking about this, right?
Yes, we were.
Yeah. What an interesting conversation that you guys
It
were having.
was an interesting. Yeah, he was asking me a little bit about that, kind of a work conversation he was having and trying to understand what makes people feel connected. And he asked me, what are those qualities? And I started thinking about even some of the kind of relationship pioneers, the Gottmans, the Harville Hendricks, the ones that we really look up to. So things like, being seen, feeling heard. But I do think it is different for everyone. How do you kind of define connection?
Yeah, I think I use very similar terms. Like, feeling connected to somebody means that I feel very known.
Mm-hmm.
But to feel known, I have to be seen. And to be seen, I have to allow myself to be seen. To allow myself to be seen, I have to feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
And to feel safe, I have to feel like I can trust the person.
Right. I love how you kind of categorize that, how one feeds into the next.
Yeah.
I really like that.
Yeah. It's like, if I go backwards and I go, well, how do I get to that point? Right. Because ultimately, if I think about, in a relationship where I feel this person knows me, they get me, they understand where I'm coming from. Generally speaking, they think that I have good intentions. They like to spend time with me. I like to spend time with them. To have like genuine curiosity and to engage for periods of time where your undivided attention is directed towards someone else in an effort to truly know them, especially somebody that you in theory already know. Right?
Yes.
Maybe it's your partner for, like you said, like 20 years. I know this person. What else could there possibly be to know? We actually have to be quite intentional about our curiosity and where we direct our attention. So that's why I talk about in relationships, nobody likes work. So I don't say you have to work on your relationship, because that's not really motivating for people.
No.
I talk about intentional attention. I talk about, if you want to create connection, real connection, then you have to intend to attend to your partner.
Yeah.
Right? You have to be curious and open. And when you've been in a connection with someone who is good with that, good at being attended to you in a real connected way, you know it. You know what it feels like. I know what it feels like on the flip side, to talk and literally be like, oh, did you not hear me because you're not responding? And the other way, where you're speaking and you're like, oh my gosh, this person is like riveted.
Yes.
They're listening, and they're listening with all of them. Yes, they're listening with their eyes, their face, right? All their body language is directed toward me. It's not just their ears.
It's fuel.
It is. It's fuel. And that kind of leads to that interesting concept that we were talking about, which is we named this episode Hungry Hearts, right? And I was thinking about how we all have physical hunger. We all have to fuel our bodies in order to survive and to function well, right? And there's all sorts of literature, and there's an entire industry on nutrition and diets and fuel for our bodies, right? And how to optimize that. We have heart hunger. And the way to fuel our hearts is through connection, right? And this is the food that our beings crave as well. So on top of food nutrition that we desperately need to survive, we need the heart food as well that comes from real, intentional attention in connected relationships.
Yes. Yes. This might be a good time to introduce those of us who aren't familiar with Gottman's bids for connection. So for anyone listening who's not familiar, Gottman's kind of, I think, a hero of both of ours.
Yes.
So John Gottman and his partner Julie have been studying couples for over 40 years, and through observation have kind of distilled down like the essence of healthy relationships, what really makes relationships thrive and blossom, and what creates the most amount of damage. And I love his concept of bids for connection. I know both of us use these, not just with our couples, but with our individual clients, and then in our own lives as well. But do you want to share a little bit about what that concept really means and looks like, and how that relates to this concept of fuel that we're talking about?
Yeah, sometimes the metaphor that I use when I'm describing a bid for connection to people is like throwing a ball, right? So people are always making bids for our attention, right? And in, like you said, in any type of engagement, any sort of relationship, right? So a child can do it with a parent. If we're talking about romantic relationships today, then let's talk about it in those terms, right? So I can say to my partner, you know, oh my gosh, it's so sunny today. That is a very innocuous statement. It's very simple. I'm just talking about the weather. Sounds like small talk, right? But I'm bidding for him to do something with my words and my interaction, right? So it's like I've thrown a ball in his direction, and now he has a choice. So he can catch the ball, right? Play catch with me. He can he can throw the ball back at my face. That's maybe not so nice. And he can let the ball just sail right over his head and maybe not even notice that I threw it in the first place. So if we look at that from John and Julie Gottman's bid for connection concept, if someone gives us a bid for connection, wow, it's so sunny outside, and I want to turn toward that bid, I will catch the ball, meaning I will turn to my partner and go, yeah, it is, isn't it? Do you want to go for a walk? Right? That's turning toward the bid for connection. Yeah. Something like that, that kind of just takes that nice, you know, attempt to connect and say, I don't want to be connected to you right now.
It's like closing a door.
It's slamming the door, right? Yeah. And then the third option is the turning away from the bid for connection. And that's like letting the ball sail over your head. You didn't even notice it because maybe you've gotten so used to living parallel lives and you don't even really hear when your partner's talking. And so your partner says, like, it's so sunny outside, and you just don't even respond.
Yeah.
You fail to engage. And what John and Julie say is, obviously we're not perfect, and so we're not always going to turn toward every bid for connection. We also would be exhausted if we did that all the time, especially if you think about a parent-child relationship. Think of a toddler.
Yes, I can.
But they talk about how it's, in general, the overarching response in your relationship to your partner should be that you more often than not turn toward those bids. So more often than not, when your partner throws a ball, you catch it. You play catch. You don't throw it back at them really hard. And you don't let it sail over your head. Because what happens is we make bids for connection all the time, but if they're ignored often enough, or if we are hurt with our own bids, we stop making them. We give up. It extinguishes that behavior. That attempt for connection disappears. And that is when people get lonely, right? So when I'm trying over and over and over to connect to the person that I love, and the lack of response or the type of response I get tells me that they don't desire a connection with me, that creates a big void, right? And that, or again, if we stick with John and Julie, they have this concept of the emotional bank account. That's withdrawal after withdrawal after withdrawal. And now I'm in overdraft.
Yes.
Right? And I am depleted emotionally and incredibly lonely in my relationship. Not because I lack a relationship, but because my relationship is non-responsive.
Yeah. I really like this concept because I think a lot of us can sometimes get lost in like the grand gestures of relationships and thinking about like, what do we need to, make this thrive, to be successful, whatever that looks like. Everybody has their own ideas. But when it really comes down to it, it's about, like you said, responding and attending to the bids. That's really what matters most. And so if we think about it in that way, it doesn't have to be overly complicated, overly time consuming, overly expensive even. It's just the consistent message you're sending that I'm interested in you.
Yeah.
I want to be here.
Yeah.
Right?
Which I think is a perfect time for us to take a little break, because then I want to talk a little bit more about then how do we respond, right? Like you said, it doesn't have to be big and over the top and expensive and grand. What does a response look like? How do we create connection and minimize and, reduce feelings of loneliness within our relationships? So we'll take a little break and then we'll come right back. Okay, we're back. So we were talking about what it's like to be in a relationship and feel lonely at the same time, and how to respond to bids for connection or hunger pains for our hearts, and how, like, what is the fuel for that? And again, if we sort of keep staying with Gottman, they talk about that one of the secrets to a loving relationship, one of the main secrets, is generosity, right? And we're not really talking about, I mean, sure, you want to buy your partner a car, go for it. But I'll take it. I'll take it. But I think it's the acts of generosity. It's how are we generous with our time, with our affection, with our words, with our energy, with our space, and sure, with our money as well, with our creativity. There's so many things that we can be generous with. How are we generous in our relationships? Or maybe that's something that we need to work on. And can we do that? Can we engage in more generosity in our relationships as a way to help foster connection, real connection? Can that be something that doesn't feel like work, but feels like intentional attention? Right?
Right.
So if we're going to do that, if we're going to move into how do we become more generous in our relationships, we might talk about love languages, which has become a really popular, I love that it's popular.
Me too.
Concept now. This is from way back. This is Gary Chapman wrote a book about this. I think it was a purple book initially. I don't know what color it is now. And he's written a whole bunch of them, pertaining to different types of relationships. But the first one was the 5 love languages. So the concept was that, we all show love in multiple ways, but most people have 1 or 2 main ways in which they speak love to the people that are closest to them. And again, we'll stick with in romantic relationships. So there's 5.
Yes. There are 5 love languages. Yes. So the way that he described them are gifts, acts of service, quality time, physical touch, and words of affirmation. So again, I think most of us can agree that we like all of the ways of being loved, but what can get a little bit tricky is when our primary ways of feeling love are different than our partners. And one thing that he talks about is how we often show love in the way that we'd like to receive it. So for example, if I'm somebody whose primary love language is gifts, then I might be inclined to show my partner love in that way. And that might not be the way my partner feels the greatest sense of love. So it's not that you actually need to have the same primary love languages. It's really about understanding what that looks like for your partner, the meaning of it, what yours is, and then how to communicate that and how to foster it. And also how to recognize that it's not a hierarchy. One form of being loved isn't better. So if I'm being totally honest, gifts is not my top love language. And I think a little part of me used to kind of be like, oh, of course, like, so materialistic. But that's not actually what it's about,
No,
right?
it's not.
It's about the meaning of it. It's about what that means to you, what it feels like, the thought that goes into it. And so again, all of them are valid. All of them are important, but really understanding what that means to you and what your partner needs. I think that's a way to start to figure out how to show up in a generous way.
Yeah, I like that you're sort of starting looking at gifts as one of the primary love languages, because I think it's one of the most misunderstood. So it is something that people often look at and go like, oh, that's about physical material gifts. It is sometimes, but why, if it is someone's primary love language, and even if it isn't, why do people like to give or receive gifts? It's usually not about the actual item itself. What happens when someone is engaging in gift giving is they are thinking about the other person. They are spending time to either go and get the present, create the present if they're making it, and they're spending money possibly if they're buying something. And there's often just a lot of thought that goes into it, right? So it's holding that person that you love in the front of your mind, right? Or maybe you saw something randomly. It's not their birthday. It's not Christmas. It's not Valentine's Day. And you saw something and it made you think of them, and you went and got it for them, right? It's just like a cute little teddy bear, or it was their favorite chocolate, right? Or I recently took up painting, and I'm going to make a painting for someone, right?
Yes.
And it takes me hours to make a painting. So for those hours, I am thinking not just about painting, I'm thinking about the person I'm painting it for. So the act of giving the gift is all these hours I was thinking about what I was going to paint, and then those hours that it took me to do it, right? Like that was all about you, right? So I made my world all about you when I was doing this, right? So I think gift giving is something people don't want to admit is something that they like. Receiving. Everybody will be like, well, I like giving gifts. I don't care about receiving them. It's okay to like receiving them.
Yes.
That's okay. And it doesn't have to be because you are super materialistic either. But then you were making a really good point about how we really have to learn how to speak our partner's love language, because we tend to speak in our own language. That makes sense. If my primary love language is words of affirmation, which is just a fancy way of saying, using words as a way of saying that I love someone, or I care about them, or I value them, that I might use my words, our listeners might pick up on that that's possibly one of my primary love languages. I'm chatty, so I can be. I love words. Right? I'm a writer.
Yeah.
I always have loved language. So that is one of my primary love languages. So hearing I love you means a lot to me. Not hearing it means a lot to me. Right? The lack of the words is devastating to me. It leaves this big, hollow, empty silence that's not a welcome silence. Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting, though, that even if somebody were to attempt to fill that with the other languages, the void would still be there.
Yeah.
seen that in couples as well, where the other person's like, but I'm doing the things, I'm doing the acts, I'm doing the gifts. It doesn't compensate for the one that the person needs the most.
That's
Right? No
right.
amount of other language is going to fill that void.
Yeah. And that's where you get people saying, I feel really unloved, or they'll even like say it like it's fact, like they don't love me.
Mm-hmm.
And that may or may not be true. They might sit there with their, their partner might be looking at them with their jaw on the floor going, what are you talking about? I cleaned the kitchen for you and I made you a nice dinner and I put the children to bed, right? And that was after I made you your favorite dinner. And that's acts of service. And that might be that person's primary love language. So they were speaking love in that language, but maybe they were speaking it to someone whose primary love language is physical touch. Which is, by the way, another one that is very misunderstood.
Yes.
Because everybody thinks physical touch is about sex.
Yeah.
Which, again, it can be. That is part of it, right? But it's about closeness, affection, right? It can be the simple thing of, holding someone's hand, kissing someone on the forehead or the cheek. It can be stroking your partner's hair, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a sexual touch. It can be... It's a loving touch, right? And it's a touch that we also know that physical touch creates all sorts of good hormone releases, right? Endorphins, oxytocin. It actually helps us manage pain if our romantic partner holds our hand when we're going through a painful procedure. It actually reduces the amount of pain that we experience. It's amazing.
Right. Isn't there correct me if I'm wrong, there's a certain amount of time. Is it 30 seconds or a minute?
20 seconds.
20 seconds, I knew you'd know it, of holding your partner, and the kind of chemicals that are released from doing that, the bonding chemicals and hormones that are released. So for everyone listening, 20 seconds is that magic number.
Yes.
You actually just increase that feeling of connectedness.
That's right. I actually have an 11-year-old daughter who has been known to ask for an oxytocin hug.
Oh, I love her.
I love her too. And she's known this from a really young age. Like I think she was probably 4 when I told her this, that if we hug for a really long time, that this is actually what makes you feel really good, right? This really long hug. And I actually this morning was hugging my 11-year-old downstairs in the kitchen. And I actually, like, after maybe 10 seconds, felt her body just like an exhale and a release. And I would say, like, try it the next time you hug your partner. If you hug them long enough, you will feel a release. You might hear an exhale, right? Because that's also likely their parasympathetic nervous system activating, right? So their sympathetic nervous system, the one that's always awake for stress, is going shh. And the parasympathetic nervous system that chills us out and comes awake when we are calm, it can only really be active when we're safe. And if we're in the arms of the person who makes us feel safe and we're in there for long enough, then we get that release of those good hormones. And then we kind of let go into that safety. And that creates a lovely connection. And doing that over time creates a lot of safety within that relationship as well. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we've talked about gifts, acts of service, physical touch, words of affirmation, and then there's quality time. Right? Is that one of yours? What's one?
Yeah, I would say words of affirmation and quality time are probably my 2. I debate because I also really like acts of service. It's a whole thing. I'm constantly...
That's because you're a mom.
Yeah, exactly. But I think quality time, if you were to ask my partner, he would probably say quality time would be one of my top.
And how would you describe that? Like for you, what is it that you need from the time?
Yeah, that's interesting because I think at first glance, quality time seems like, a lot of date nights, time away. For me, quality time is even if I'm on the couch watching a show, I actually just like him to be there. Even if he's doing his own thing, watching his own show, or if I'm, doing a chore, if I'm, cleaning up the kitchen at the end of the night, just his physical presence and the ability to just catch up a little bit at the end of the day. That's so meaningful to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels small. It doesn't feel like it has to be anything big. Of course, I like a, dinner out or, a nice walk, but just having him physically there and the ability to just check in with each other, maybe have a laugh, chat a little bit, that really fuels me.
Yeah, and I think quality time is one of those ones that I've consistently heard from different people that they need different things from it. So for some people, they say, if they're sitting next to me, that's not what I need. I need to be engaged in a conversation, right? And
Right.
other people are like, I just need them to be sitting next to me,
Yeah,
right? So I think it's really important to have this conversation with your partner, right? Because this, again, is something you could think you know the answer to, and maybe you do. And maybe you only know some of the answer, and maybe it's still worth a conversation, right? Like maybe you know your partner's top 2 love languages, but you could still ask them, like, tell me more about why you like that or what it is that you need from that, right? So if my partner's, primary love language is quality time, tell me what that means for you. How do you get that from me? How do you seek that from me? How do you bid for that from me?
Yes.
Right?
Right.
Because when we ask these questions, again, that's that open curiosity, that willingness to intentionally attend. We get all sorts of information, and even having the conversation is a gift to our partner, saying, I want to know you, right?
Yes.
I want to prioritize our relationship, right? And then that's watering that garden, right? That's taking care of that part of our life, right? And nurturing that space. I'm going to put aside time today, and I'm going to talk to you about, what do you need from me? How do you experience love from me the best? What do you like that I do? What would you like more of?
Right. Yes. And I think it's also important to remember there's an evolution to that, right? So as, time goes on and life changes, and even your family unit might look a little different if, there's a child involved or something shifts in the household. Your primary love languages and what they look like could shift as well. So I think checking in over time, not assuming that it's going to be the same and stagnant, that's important too.
Yeah.
I know for me, quality time pre-baby and post is a little different because sometimes I just don't want any more conversation, but that doesn't mean I don't want him there.
Yeah.
So just being mindful of the fact that we're all always shifting and changing, and staying curious about that too.
Yeah. Yeah. Wanting to know, right? Not because we're listening to it from a, place of tell me my deficits or how I'm failing you. It's tell me more about you. Tell me who you are. Tell me more of what I thought I knew, because maybe you can fill in some gaps I didn't know were there. And I love you, so I want to give you more of what you are hungry for, what your heart hungers for.
Absolutely. Let's add some currency to that bank account.
That's right. That's right. Let's put it create a massive savings account, because that gets us through the storms of life that come, right? Inevitably, there's difficult times and there's rough waters, and that's okay. But we weather those a heck of a lot better when there's been a little bit of a cushion in the bank account, right? Then we don't go into overdraft whenever there's a bit of a ripple.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I guess that's our discussion for today, for Valentine's Day, for this particular season. And we are really hoping that everybody gets what they need for their heart today, as with every day. And maybe you'll have some interesting conversations with people about, what their love languages are or what it means to be connected. And you'll just do some really intentional tuning in and attending to other people as a really lovely gift of love this week. Thanks for sharing your time with us. And remember, if you are feeling alone in the valley, you are not alone. We are right there with you.